Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to another property live stream. This is, of course, Property Quorum. It's where we're going to lock heads, lock horns, and talk about a topic that's affecting or about to affect a large number of people. In this case, I'm afraid it's going to be landlords and portfolio people who have got a number of properties. This is all about letting agents. They need to be warmed. There's one form that if you just to be required, is part of the Renters Reform Act. If you don't get it out, that's £7,000 first offence, 40 grand if you do it again. Good Lord, that's a slap on the wrist. All right, Hamish, get us underway and tell us what the heaven's name's going on.
Well, trouble is, I don't know, and the whole aspect of introducing all sorts of new legislation is who the heck is responsible for remembering all of it, all of the time. Now, fortunately, there are different people, but it does mean, if you actually think about it, the number of people are now required to help to keep your small business running, if you happen to be a landlord with one property, the number of different people you need to have advising you. Is it the tax advisor that you need to? And of course, we had this argument last week, and Zara was here with us when we were speaking about it, that all of a sudden she has to become a tax advisor. So basically you do need a tax advisor. Do you need an accountant? Is an accountant a tax advisor? Possibly he is, or she is. I don't know. Is it legal required? Do you need somebody on the legal side? Is it the responsibility of the solicitor? Keep you advised and keep you up to date with the changes that are taking place. Now, absolutely fine. I was speaking to somebody only yesterday, and they said to me, oh, I was just looking at my on their mobile phone, because I don't do mobile banking. I can't cope with it. It's bad enough trying to do it on the big screen. And they said to me, well, they set their company up about 6 months ago, and it said to them that corporation tax, they owed £24.16 on April the 1st. Now, they'd hardly done any trading at all. There was absolutely no profit. So where did this corporation tax sort of come from? Now, these things sneak up upon us. Now, this is the worrying thing. And we've got this renters reform bill. The trouble is, with so much of the things that the government is actually bringing forward, and it's not just this government, I mean, it's governments generally, there's nothing systematic about the whole thing. They have different time frames for different aspects of the whole thing, because I know there are some things coming in later on this year, as well as what's coming in at the end of May, as well as certain things that happened on the 1st of April. And then, of course, you get some things that change from the 1st of January. So when the heck does it actually sort of come in? And of course, what we have is the onus now put onto, is it the landlord? And many, many landlords, because they've had enough challenges through their lifetime of their 1, 2, 10 properties that they've just passed it all over to a letting agent. So who's responsible for it? Is it the letting agent that needs to let the client? I don't know these things. We better pass to somebody who has a lot more knowledge about this stuff. Silas, rescue me.
Silas, I'm feeling a bit, probably a bit irritable and mischievous, so I'm just going to play devil's advocate. Surely such a loose and unkempt system needs more regulation. Otherwise, people just get away with murder.
Well, of course, Gareth, I think one of the things that people look to for legislation is to stamp out the bad apples, but those bad actors, should I say, are in every industry, in every profession. It doesn't matter how well regulated it is. You will always find criminals doing criminal things or fraudsters doing fraudulent things. And so to sort of anchor on to Hamish's point earlier, I'm not really sure what the idea behind this legislation actually is. It was supposed to give tenants better rights, better longevity of term of their tenancy within the property. But unfortunately, it seems to be doing quite the opposite, because there's been so much hoo-ha about this legislation coming into play. There's been a lot of misadvice in some respects floating around on social media. So a lot of landlords have heard headline news. They've thought, well, we've had a battering as far as our tax liabilities are concerned. We've had a battering as far as our profitability is concerned. Now we've got more and more legislation to comply with. Now I'm potentially going to be fined £7,000, £40,000, as you highlighted at the start of the show. And so landlords are beginning to ask the question, is it really worth it? I saw this week that there was a landlord in Scotland who wanted to thank a certain board or body within Scotland for keeping his non-paying tenant in his property for a full 12 months with no rent coming in, and a further 4 months whilst they went through the court action. So 16 months a tenant was living in a property, not paying any rent. And not only that, was what we would loosely describe as a hoarder. So not a square inch of that property was not covered in rubbish. And so the cost for that landlord to bring that property back into use, let's say they've lost probably, if it was about £800 a month, for example, they've lost an enormous amount of rental income. They've still had to pay the mortgage. Now they've got to clear the property, fumigate it, new carpets, new curtains, get it right, ready to go back into the rental market again, with the proviso that here's the gun to your head. If you get this wrong now, we're coming after you. And that's just a normal landlord trying to do the very best that they can for their family, provide accommodation for others. And yet that story happens frequently, and it's happening more and more and more now because of cost of living crisis and tenants thinking that they can game the system. Not all tenants, not all landlords are bad, but this minority view that we're trying to address here with heavy-handed legislation, I think is overkill.
I mean, I've got a number of scenarios to run by you. The most obvious of which is, let's start at the basic, the forgotten existing tenant. Landlord has a tenant, say, from 2024, don't realise they need the new info sheet by May 2026. Result, £7,000, if you please. Now that's obvious, and I'm assuming in the early days there'll be a lot of that. I'm toing and froing. Well, get it right next time. I get that, but then imagine now a scenario where you've got an agent managing 50 properties, and the agent drops the ball. They miss sending the document to say 5 of the tenants. Result, we know that's £35,000 worth of fines. And then if I look at on the other side of the coin, maybe the more nefarious use of it, a tenant uses it tactically. They fall into arrears, whatever, and they don't receive the document, or they say they never received the document, and they say, well, landlord non-compliant. Outcome, while the tenant is, landlord chasing his tail, sorting that out, tenant wins himself a couple more months, if not more. And then if you went further, and I think this is me thinking perhaps even more nefariously. Let's say there's a counter enforcement sweep. Of course, with multiple tenancies managed by, there's going to be a few that missed out. Suddenly, they demand immediate fines so that they can pad out their own coffers. And then you've got possible sales or refinance complications, repeat offender escalations. Suddenly, you've got £40,000 being owed by potentially per property in a portfolio of properties. I don't know. I have a very bad feeling about how this could be misused.
You raised some really interesting points, Gareth. And again, there's this myth around landlords sitting on piles of cash and they're putting it into property because they're so wealthy. And for the small minority, that is potentially true. Maybe they've sold a business and they're just going to roll that cash into property. But for the most part, many landlords are actually reasonably well leveraged. And so it doesn't take much in terms of one or two of these events, especially if you're a large portfolio landlord. I mean, I've met guys who have, 200, 300 or more properties, greedy landlords, obviously, but, they've got a couple of hundred properties there. And, those guys are running a business that is on fairly fine margins. They've got a mortgage that needs to be paid across multiple properties. And what we worked out is that if you if your rental income doesn't come in for one property, you've still got to pay the mortgage, as we talked about earlier. But that actually knocks out the profitability for at least 4 properties within your portfolio. So, these sorts of things could quite easily happen. Tenant claims they didn't receive the gas safety, didn't receive the property information sheet or the tenant information sheet, etc. Right. All of this prevents potentially gaining possession of the property when it goes through the courts. The judge can look at that and go, well, you didn't provide the information. Well, yes, I did. No, you didn't. Show me that you provided it to the tenant. Oh, right. I don't have access to that email account anymore. So, is it reasonable to assume that a landlord has to send, a copy of this fact sheet in hard copy, recorded delivery, proof of posting and all that sort of thing in order to cover their backs? I think these are the rising costs of doing.
Which is, it's because, I mean, as Hamish pointed out earlier, it's more regulation, which potentially could lead to more misuse. I'm not necessarily certain that this kind of draconian level of regulation is necessarily going to be a benefit to the whole of society. I think it will benefit a few people, but not by any means the vast. I read somewhere that over 80% of landlords are one default away from losing a property within their portfolio and potentially becoming insolvent, purely because, I mean, I knew this. I knew a lady, an ex, used to be a fashion designer in the 80s. She owned, I think, 8 or 9 properties in central London. You'd think fat cat sitting on loads of money, but guess what? Like so many, had been scared to give them any rises in their rentals, and so was basically in some cases paying their mortgage for them and making a loss. So and she was one default away from losing one or more of the properties.
Yeah, when that unraveling starts to happen, it is absolutely painful for anybody to go through. It destroys lives, and what the scenario you've just outlined there, Gareth, is very common for a lot of landlords. Is that they prefer long-term tenants over many years, and so they won't raise the rent. And so this is what's happening now: as landlords are exiting the market. Any new landlords coming in, and there is a division happening now. So we're getting the smaller landlords exiting, which is what the government have always wanted. They want larger landlords taking over. But of course, this is why rents have risen so quickly, or the average rent has risen so quickly, because all of those smaller landlords are getting out who haven't raised the rent for years. And now it comes back to market rent because there's a new landlord, they're renting the property for the first time, and tenants are going, we can't afford this. Now, you raised a really interesting point earlier. Who is actually policing this legislation, and do they actually know the intricacies of the market? Because in my experience, very often they don't.
No, I have a feeling it will be enforced in potentially a ham-fisted way, and where it might collect in a few miscreants, it will also knock flat a lot of honest, hard-working landlords who are usually got their own jobs as well, and are relying upon the agents to manage these things. The agents potentially get caught out if they've got a large portfolio and a couple of them haven't had the tenancy form. It just seems to me, Hamish, that we are on the verge of ruining an industry purely for want of a ha'porth of tar.
Well, I think we've seen a downhill run, really. I mean, the Conservative government made some serious errors here, and trying to put so much pressure on landlords, because it was obviously, again, we speak about this being broke Britain. It was fascinating. Reading a book at the moment, which I'm really getting into the murky depths of, which was written in 1972, and it was speaking about what was happening, what was needed, and it spoke about this country, and we were in the top 5 of the world. Yeah. We were alongside America and Russia, so we were within the top sort of 3 important sort of the amount of influence that we had, the amount of wealth that we had. Although when you think about this was quite encouraging, because we'd actually devastated our sort of, I would say, a war chest, but we devastated the economy with both the First and the Second World Wars. Yeah, and basically this country was recovering from the cost of those particular sort of wars, but it was speaking about the sort of influence of what we needed to do and sort of all the rest of it. Now, time after time that we've actually sort of had over a period, and we know this sort of going back when the Labour government, the turn of the century, we were still a fairly wealthy country. We were still doing sort of fairly well. Unfortunately, Blair in his infinite wisdom made sure something was starting to go downhill from his period of time in office onwards, because it started on a decline. Now, unfortunately, the next government that came in, which was effectively, it was the combination government, it was the Conservative governments along with our Lib Dems, which that isn't ever going to happen again, is it? However, that sort of came in, and we saw that they didn't turn back the page. They didn't actually restore any of those things that we'd lost through the previous sort of government. The decline actually sort of continued. And they obviously looked at this because they thought, okay, we need to do something about the coffers. Where can we get some money? Oh, these here landlords.
Yes.
Now, the Conservatives would have known
they
better.
do seem like an easy mark, don't they, Hamish? Are we moving from cool Britannia to cruel Britannia? Because it feels a bit like the government is looking for any way it can, and the councils looking for any way they can to replenish. And one of the easiest ways is to throw the hammer of Thor at the nearest landlord. It doesn't see. Silas, before I hand back to Hamish just to finish us off, have you got any thoughts about direction, or is there anything that you can perhaps, can you find something positive in all this?
You know, Hamish just raised a really interesting point about the what I term now the uni party, because all of these politics seem to follow a certain direction, and
yes.
none of it seems to be for the greater good. And I think everybody's now got to the point where we're fed up, we've had enough, and there needs to be a change in thought. The thing that bothers me a lot, and I listen to some of these interrogation, shall we say, of the senior civil servants, and a lot of them have, with respect, come out of university and gone straight into a civil service position, and they have no clue about how to run a business, what's actually involved in the day-to-day of most of Britain who are employed in SMEs. And so there is a level of incompetence, and I do mean that they have no clue about how a drafted legislation then sits with the practicalities of day-to-day working life. And so we have this overburdened populace and businesses being unable now to actually start to, you can't bring a young apprentice in as a chippy or as a plumber, because the cost of hiring young blood is so expensive now. People are just saying we've had enough. So you've got 25% youth unemployment in London right now. And the last two times that happened was in the 1980s and 2008. So we have a very, very precarious financial situation. And unfortunately, many of the politicians, again, are career politicians. They only care about re-election. They haven't got that lifetime of experience. And I think we're entering a world, and, forgive me for saying this, but you've got people now like Rupert Lowe who are standing up and going, do you know what? We can't carry on like this. We've tried the utopia of open borders. We've tried the utopia of, massive legislation, and we need to cut all of this and get back to grassroots. And, I pride myself on working hard. I would far rather work hard for a smaller amount of money with the idea of having prospects to grow than reliant upon this minimum wage. It's not about bashing minimum wage. Yes, there has to be safeguards, but the point being, we think we can legislate our way into growth, and we really can't. That's just not the way it works. If you look at somewhere like India, for example, I love going to India because there's a vibrancy, there's a passion around what it means to be Indian, and the culture of being Indian, and the passion for the country. You can really feel that they're growing out of this, third world economy more towards a developing nation now, and it's vibrant, it's upbeat, people are patriotic, and it's wonderful. We've lost all of that, and I think it's now starting to return because people have realised we're in a very dangerous place. So I think we are going to see the slashing of legislation in the future because it's going to be necessary to fund economic growth, or we just decline.
I love the Indian culture because it always seems to have a can-do attitude. It's not woe is me, all that happened. It's right. What can we do now?
Yeah.
Hamish, would you care to take us home, please?
A slight change of tack in a way. We're still speaking about the similar sort of idea and the legislation. And I was just reminded there by something Silas said about different people coming into different positions and all the rest of it. And this is a bit of an overlap with what might have been a podcast tomorrow. It's going to put something out. But Reform have just sort of nominated their new spokesman for housing. And one of the things he was speaking about, the whole thing about housing is totally overregulated. And as a consequence of Grenfell, there's just too much regulation, so they're not building high-rise flats.
Yes.
So this was a wonderful thing to say. But then he went on to say, well, people die anyway.
Yeah, oh my God, when I saw that, it's just...
And I thought, well, now where the hell's he come from? But he's come from significant positions, as Silas just suggested. He has all of this knowledge, but has he really lived life to be able to turn around and say people die anyway, so it's perfectly all right to carry on building unsafe housing because these builders have got away with it? But let's bring us back to what we were trying to speak about, because there is over-regulation there, but it is over-regulation by people who are not familiar with living in that particular life. A civil servant is a civil servant. If he hasn't worked in business, it's very easy to conjure up, oh, this is a good idea. Why don't we do this? Another way of earning money, another way of giving somebody some better rights. But unfortunately, and again, we can see this in London as well, the youth in London have realised that, hey, look, the police can't do anything about it. Nobody's going to take you to court. Let's go raid a load of shops. What is this all about? We've got all these regulations. We've got all this CCTV. Yet all this regulation that we keep putting in. Is it benefiting anybody?
I think conceptually it probably would have done, but if you don't have the police or desperately need more boots on the ground, if you don't have them there, what's the point in putting regulations in? They're not worth the paper they're printed on. Thank you so much, Hamish, as ever. A spirited discussion, Silas. And to all of you watching, thank you for taking the time out to be with us today. We will be once more until the breach, dear friends, next week. Of course, we've got Bank Holiday Friday. What I'm going to be doing is repeating an old show for tomorrow. So please watch out for that. I'm going to pick one of them where we were putting out music to highlight the sweet, delightful Greenwich Council. So all you Greenwich Council are watching, look out for that. And make sure you join in on the chorus. And until next week, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars. And in these interesting times, please do look after your mental health. Until then, bye-bye.